Herald, the Holy Knight, is here. We're finally learning in general a lot more about the Holy Knights and their powers, and finally we're starting to see the dark path that he took Elbaf down before his fall, or I guess before his sacrifice. But what if I told you that everything here is actually much darker and way more tragic than we all ever realized, potentially even revealing the truth that Emu has hidden from us this entire time, and potentially even a hint about the final road poneglyph. Let's get into it. Grab yourself a coffee or your favorite beverage, it's time to get into it. And the first massive thing that I really want to talk about here is the Holy Knights, because thank God we're finally getting some information about them properly this time. And of course, really between chapters 1167 and 68, we've now gotten a lot of new info about the organizational structure, their powers, the limitations of the Abyss, and honestly, I think that a few really nuanced things kind of flew under the radar a little bit since it's been pretty locked in on Herald. Speaking of which though, congratulations Herald, you did it, man. You finally became a full-on Holy Knight, even, in name now. All it took was, well, Shanks dipping, and you were then next in line to claim one of the coveted Deep Sea Covenant spots, which is the symbol I called in my last chapter reviews. In case you need the refresher quickly, and now that I've got a little bit more clarity, I can really explain it here. Tier 1 is the Shallow Covenant, the little plus sign and circle mark that Shanks and Shamrock both showed off. That's for devoted blades of God, and there's not a limit on how many of them can actually exist. By now we kind of know that it's pretty much like a Holy Knight in training sort of spot where they still do the tasks and objectives of a regular Holy Knight, but they aren't quite immortal yet. In chapter 1140, killing him also confirms that this tier mark is also what lets them travel through the Abyss. But other than that, it doesn't seem to give them any abyssal magic powers quite yet. Tier 2, however, is the Deep Sea Covenant with the same logo as before, but with some fun horns on it. The horns that are then added personally by Emu, probably kind of symbolizing what they do with the Domi Reversi stuff a little bit too. And this thing then is the real symbol of the Holy Knights, which is why we see it on Killingham's uniform. And between this tier and the next tier, only 13 people can actually hold this position. They're also the only 13 people apparently who actually know about Emu, since it seems that Emu themselves is the one who grants the mark, as we can kind of see in this chapter with Herald. And this addition of the horns to the mark by Emu seems to grant it its powers or activate it, and it makes the person immortal and also boosts their powers up significantly, and also seems to let them create abyssal pentagrams that can be used, as little video game fast travel points basically. And I wanted to quickly note that the power buff thing is kind of really important actually, because it low-key seems to imply that Shamrock is straight up stronger than Shanks. Am I missing something here? Because it seems to be implied in chapter 1167 that this was the case, but now we've also got direct confirmation that this mark also grants a power buff of some kind on top, right? So I'm very hyped at the possibility of Shamrock now, because he's gonna be insanely strong, at least based on all this additional context. It would be a bit of a letdown if he wasn't. But let's not forget about tier level 3, the Abyssal Contract, which I still don't know what it fully does differently, but a safe guess is that it's just more power. Maybe the Gorosei's yokai transformations are actually tied to this form, since I'd assume that Garling already has that level of power too. But I'm not 100% certain, since it seems like Summers actually showed off this mark when he was first introduced, so maybe it's something else we've yet to see and it's not connected to the Holy Knight marking, or Summers just kind of freestyled his own tattoo here. Oh, also I realized something recently the other day that I think I just totally missed in general, which I'll be honest happens every now and then, because there's just so much One Piece lore recently to dig into. But also, I may have just forgotten I originally noticed this, because I make a lot of videos and sometimes the details fade once big new ones appear. Not sure if this is relatable, maybe if you're into theory crafting you can understand, but anyways, did you ever notice that Summer's bottom mark is just exactly the same as the Sand Briss logo, right? The ship that fell from the sky at the beginning of Skypiea? Someone recently pointed this out to me again, and I just haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I really wonder what it's all about. Could Summers be tied to that kingdom in some way? Or was the Saint Briss ship maybe part of the Holy Knights fleet in the past? I mean, talk about a Willie Gallon upscale if so. There is something here, I feel. I just can't quite put my fingers on it. If you have ideas, please let me know. Regardless, I actually forgot that there is a fourth secret level of the Covenants that Imu creates that I haven't been talking about, which is, of course, the forced contract, the Diabolical Covenant. And I think this one kind of gets conflated with Domi Reversi. This happened to me at the beginning too, but it's actually a different thing. This is the move that Imu uses to create a giant circle under an unwilling participant, forcing them into what I can only assume is the Abyss, right? Before then activating Domi Reversi to completely overtake them. We see exactly that happening the first time Imu does this in chapter 1150 with Dorian Bragi before Domi Reversi is even activated. So yeah, really, Oda is making it all about as clear as possible that Imu seems to be the Sea Devil. Whether or not that is their only title or one of many or what they were originally, I'm not quite sure yet, we need more information, but I think all these pacts with a demon god are being received loud and clear, Oda-sensei, at this point. We get it, we get it. Alright, cool. With that being broken down, I now really want to circle back to Herald becoming a Holy Knight specifically, because there was something that popped into my brain during this chunk of the chapter specifically, and it's actually something that I really hope we learn more about very soon. Because of course, Herald became a Holy Knight only because Shanks apparently ghosted his entire family. Herald then was next in line for that spot, so he got it, and since we now know that only 13 people can have next level contracts, something spicy must have probably happened, right? Something way darker than a simple good job you're promoted. Apparently, for some cosmic Devil of the Sea reasons, or maybe just personal preference, Imu can't just simply add a new Holy Knight. Just, oh, number 14, sure, why not? No, it seems to always have to be 13. In other words, they need to replace one, meaning that if Herald got bumped up, someone else was now no longer alive to be a Holy Knight, or at least was not any more loyal to Imu. At least I think we can assume so, because they're immortal, and I don't feel like one can simply retire from the Holy Knights unless you straight up, do something very crazy or have power rivaling Imu's maybe. And as you can already tell, I think this opens up the door to the yummy, juiciest possibility that a Holy Knight didn't retire, didn't step down, and didn't wander off into the sunset. You know what I'm trying to say. Someone in One Piece actually died. And because these are the Celestial Dragons we're talking about, someone was probably removed from life in this case, which is kind of gnarly if you ask me, because I think the rattiest Ratman Garling straight up killed one of his comrades so that Shanks, his own son, could get promoted. And I mean, come on. Come on, we're talking about Saint Figaland. I love backstabbing anyone in my life that hinders my own purpose. R.I.P. Mama Shanks, I guess. Garling absolutely seems like the type of guy to me who would just ensure that his darling returned son Shanks, whom he met a year ago, rises through the ranks fast enough. Even if that means clearing the board, helping a little bit, with the current knight who's inconveniently still breathing. How dare the imbecile. So then this made me wonder about the next person behind Herald, who I can then only assume probably was Gunkko. She was also a devoted Blade of God during God Valley, and we don't really know if she was a Holy Knight by the time that Herald came around. My personal guess is that maybe Gunkko was too busy being Imu's personal maid and assistant, and then only once Herald died, Imu decided they needed to get a little bit more hands-on and promoted Gunkko. And I assume that's also the reason why Shamrock came to Elbaf and tried and recruited Loki, since Saturn had just, tapped out recently, opening a spot within the Goti 13, the Imu 13, because, yes, Garling became a Gorosei, but then that spot still opened up. Honestly, I kind of think it would explain a lot about Gunkko's overall pride and vibe, right? Like, if she was brainwashed by Imu, serving them dutifully, and then became a Blade of God, that's a pretty big deal. And then becoming a full-on Holy Knight, that's like a mega honor. No wonder she's more cutthroat than anyone else. Though it does still sort of make you wonder, what is up with all her bandages in the modern era? Is she like tier 3 now? Is she, a great ninja? Is she a Yonin? Is she bandaged up because her sick new Abyssal tattoo is still healing? Maybe. I hope she's using Aquifer or one of these fake skin things too. After all, in case you didn't know, tattoos do need some proper cleaning to not get infected. And you can now guess whether or not I have a tattoo, and if so, where it is. please speculate. Because I think the last thing we all want for poor Gunkko is some dark eldritch level scurvy putting her in the hospital. On a slightly more serious note, she might also be like psycho strong if she is a tier 3 Holy Knight at this point, because my head has been lingering on that moment from the God Valley flashback where the other members of her clan are like, yo, sick, we finally got Gunkko, maybe we can actually win something this year. Remember that guy? That was actually kind of funny, and that's kind of making me think that Gunkko was already pretty nasty with it on God Valley as just a devoted Blade of God with 2 promotions potentially and some big power boosts. Yeah, maybe Gunkko is like the top tier Holy Knight in the modern era outside of Shamrock, which I guess would make sense since she was the one sent on this top mission to Elbaf with him. Imo seems to really need that giant army, and who better to send than the top 2 fighters to secure that objective outside the Gorosei. And that would also explain why Imo uses her as a vessel, because she might just be absolutely nutty with it. Also, knowing Imo, does it really feel like they'd be the person to possess like a low-ranking member of the Holy Knights? Maybe, but then also since we've seen them possess specifically Saturn on God Valley and not some other random Holy Knight, I would assume that that would put Gunkko on a fairly high level, or maybe she just exists in like some slightly detached, you know, form from the other Holy Knights because she's Imu's personal maiden or whatever. And just because when we're on the topic of Gunkko, I need to talk about this a little bit more. How does Brook play into all this and like his potential, you know, connection with all of this? Because again, we got this little flashback cut with Brook and Gunkko, so they have some sort of relationship, whether they're actually father and daughter or whether they have some other relationship. Something was going on here, and we can still only assume with that setup that Oda left us with before we went into the entire God Valley flashback that, you know, Brook's music might be the key to actually freeing Gunkko from the possession of Imu. It's also been suggested that Imu is able to actually temper with memories of people, right? Like, Gunkko seems to remember suddenly flashes of, you know, her past with Brook, which seems to really surprise her, and in a way she's like waking up from this like trance-like state before Imu then is like, yeah, no, you stay right where you are, and just completely possesses her. So that kind of makes you wonder if these top 13 people that are in the top ranks of, you know, Imu and have knowledge of them, maybe Imu quite on purpose is controlling their memories and cutting things out, suppressing other things, and maybe even implanting other memories that weren't there before, just to make sure that these 13 people absolutely stay in line and never reveal their existence to anyone else. I think that would make a lot of sense if you're trying to stay hidden as well. And what a great way also, by the way, to make sure they stay loyal to you if you can just play with their memories. And it does seem like, again, as we see in this chapter, which we'll get to, you know, Imu can just almost completely control them to the point where it's physically impossible for them to actually disobey in direct order. Would be so cool though if it's not Luffy, but actually Brook and his soul powers, you know, kind of being the thing that might free people from that contract, actually touching the soul directly, which might be what Imu is doing with these contracts. Touching the soul, after all, a contract with the devil is usually bargaining away your soul, and Brook being the Soul King might just be the natural antidote or the natural counterpart to Imu's powers directly, which would be sick. Then, of course, there's the entire idea still that, you know, Brook might have just been a Holy Knight himself. I already made a video about this. I think the stocks for that have just gone up infinitely more, and I'm actually working on a video for that, which is gonna be out probably Wednesday or Thursday. Keep an eye out for that. I think this theory has even longer legs now than it ever has before with all the recent reveals. Anyways, maybe it's not true, maybe Gunkko is not a 3rd rank, but part of me is really just hoping for some cutie little Holy Knight relationship between her and Shamrock maybe. Now, I don't think that the Celestial Dragons deserve love and care, but something is very special and off about specifically these 2 guys. So I don't know, I think I'm gonna let it slide in my own headcanon shipping. All I think I'm saying is that out of all the Holy Knights and the Gorosei, Gunkko and Shamrock have the highest potential of actually changing sides and secretly being good or becoming good. Alright, sorry. Circling back to Herald, since 1168 really was meant as a sort of this is what he did after Rocks died sort of chapter. Woo. How do you like my art, by the way? Peak Herald. Maybe I should be drawing One Piece with these mad art skills. And honestly, I still really can't get over how often he drops the ball, right? Not only because he's dumb or evil or anything of that nature, right? But simply because of how completely he misreads the situation that he's actually in. Everything he does is guided mostly by misplacing his confidence and trust into the government. Like, okay, really, let's just focus for a moment on how he reacted to meeting Imu. My man here is kind of amped, and then he just casually built a massive pentagram in Elbaf for Mu, not thinking this could be a bad thing. No real questions asked because Imu promised, Pinky promised that Elbaf would join the world government after this happened, until, big surprise, it didn't happen. In true Emu fashion, Herald of course got duped into turning Elbaf into an army able to rival the entire marine fleet. Jeez, man, like, also, I think I might have been just underselling the Giants overall. Like, I knew they were very powerful, but like, we always see characters beat them up constantly, so maybe I really didn't give them enough credit for their real strengths. But if Emu is saying themselves that Elbaf has the potential to rival the world government's strongest military force, I guess we're gonna take their word for it. Also, I wanted to point out how genie-like Emu really is. Like, they're definitely giving off deal with the devil vibes in the sense that Herald's wording seemed to be his own downfall. I don't know, like sort of a monkey's paw situation for the 6 people watching that understand what that means. Emu was going to fulfill their deal by making Elbaf a part of the world government, just not, peacefully. A little bit more violent. At least though that somehow made Herald understand that he's, fucked up pretty badly. So he summoned Jarul and his 2 sons to finish him off before Emu could undo all the progress that Herald had been making towards making Elbaf a more peaceful nation. Now, unfortunately, it turns out that Hajrudin actually wasn't around, but Loki was. He was in prison, but swiftly unshackled at his daddy's request. Which kind of leads me to the most perplexing moment of this entire chapter, something I'm actually not in love with, which is the ending here where Herald apparently dies. Because I can't tell if this is supposed to be the end of the flashback or not. Like, I feel like it won't be. There's still stuff to wrap up with, like with Shanks and Loki and how did he get captured and the fruit and whatnot. But the narrator coming in at the end is kind of messing with my brains a little bit. If this is the ending of everything and we don't see Herald kick the big giant bucket, I gotta say I won't be particularly happy, to say the least. Because even in the original scene, we only got a silhouette and it seemed like Herald was already transforming at that point in the story too, based on Emu's devil powers. I don't know, I think like we kind of deserve more conclusion here if we jump back right now just into the present timeline and we see Luffy stuff. I'd be for it per se, like I'm very excited to get back, but at the same time I still want to see more of Loki's story so far. I want to see what happened with the devil fruit. Is it the Nika fruit maybe, right? What did Loki do out on the sea? We know nothing about the time that he spent out on the ocean. Was he betrayed by Jarul? Did Jarul frame him? Or is he in cahoots with Jarul? And, what happened with Shanks now that, Shanks knew his father and they were both holy knights, and then maybe Loki attacked Shanks because he thought that Shanks was responsible for his father's death and stuff like that? Or are Shanks and Loki actually in cahoots like we thought? If so, what was the point of all of this? What would are we gonna learn more about Shanks' stuff? There is just so much that we still could learn that I personally hope we're still gonna get in this flashback. Also, just to throw it out there, the year is almost over. We have like 2 or 3 chapters max left this month, this year. And we know that Oda loves kicking off the new year with a massive chapter, or at least ending the current one. So I would assume that next chapter is not the last chapter of this year, which would then mean that 2 or 3 chapters from now, I think we're gonna get back into the main storyline and actually see Luffy see Emu for the first time, or something else really crazy happen. So my gut feeling is that yes, this flashback isn't over, but if it is, oh boy, I feel like we'd be like cheated out of a lot of really cool stuff. So in preparation for that potentially being the case, and at least the next chapter, I guess, I wanted to talk about something very important. Where's Waldo? I mean, who killed Herald? As far as I can see, there are 3 main culprits as far as I'm concerned. 3 people with the power, relationship, and the will to off the king of Elbaf here. And the most obvious is, of course, Loki, right? Who might simply have been strong enough to stop him out of the get-go. Loki has always had the aura of I am the GOAT and clearly is the one blamed for Herald's death, right? I think it's the least likely option because honestly it seems like the entire point of the flashback is to clear Loki's name, and Scopper clearly doesn't seem to think that Loki's a bad guy, which makes it all the more logical that it isn't Loki, but it still could have been, and it's just a very tragic necessity. Loki is very powerful and has a fancy hammer that summons island-sized lightning blasts, and I'm also pretty safely assuming that with dreams of his kind, he's a Conqueror's Haki user too, so Loki might have very well destroyed Herald at his own father's request, kind of mirroring the Rox and Garb Roger situation. Seeing as Emo has now started to force Herald to act against his own will, Loki, Mr. Isle of Nika, Liberation and Destruction, seems like the ideal person fairly enough to obliterate a person who has lost control and been chained against their will. And I guess in this case also chained not against their will, but you know, I was thinking mentally chained. Double chained. Also, it's very cool that as we find out more about Emu's abilities, they do really seem to contrast perfectly with Luffy's character, right? It's freedom versus control, and Loki, he's on team freedom, I would say, for sure. Freedom and chaos, that's Luffy, and that's what my boy here is all about. And for all I know, that could be the argument that Loki's making here. Hey, like, what I killed wasn't our dad anymore. That's what he might be saying, right? Like, he could be saying to Hashiruden, I came in there, our father asked me to kill him before he destroys the entire country, or like, kills everyone. What was Herald's plan, or what did Emu want Herald to do? To just subjugate the entire country by force? Probably. I think that would make a lot of sense. So basically Herald tells Loki, stop me before I transform. Maybe that's when he starts transforming into a devil because, you know, Loki hesitates and doesn't want to kill his father. And then he's like, okay, gotta do something about this. Maybe we see some of Loki's crazy power for the first time. And then Loki maybe feels guilty in a sense for killing his father, or what was his father, but kind of technically he wasn't kind of there anymore. Again, same as the Rock situation potentially. And again, as mentioned, I'm also very curious about Jarul's role in all of this too, because there seems to, like, why is Jarul not being blamed for this, but Loki is? Or did Loki arrive first and Jarul just misinterpreted the entire situation? Could that be what's going on? But for now, just hold on to all of that because I'm gonna come back to the entire Loki thing at the end here. For now, I want to talk about the second option, which I think is Shanks, because his involvement would add a really nuanced angle to this super pivotal moment in the story. Remember that Shanks was in the Holy Land and specifically did not take the second marking and became a Holy Knight, kind of escaping control of Emu. That's of course the reason why Herald ended up taking the Holy Knight spot to begin with, causing him to then lose control and be subservient to Emu, and then very quickly after that, Shanks made his way over to Elbaf during Herald's death. And we've seen how fast this man can move and how top tier his Haki sensing is. If Herald went full Emu mode, Shanks definitely could have made it into the castle in time to stop him, right? At this point, he still has his arm and presumably his tattoo, so theoretically he should even be able to use the Abyss marking that Herald has created in this room himself, despite not being part of the Holy Knights anymore, or yes, he never was technically, you get what I'm saying. And Shanks is the only person on Elbaf that would know the limits of the Abyss, right? Assuming he was paying attention in Holy Knight school or wherever he learned everything. If Shanks realizes that Herald is deep into Abyssal rituals, sees the threat that's rising, and steps in to stop that, Herald's death becomes a moment of Elbaf's salvation. Shanks killing Herald would not be personal, in fact it would probably be very tragically preventative. That way, Herald didn't forgo his humanity to the devil during his final hours, right? And think about it, if Shanks was the person who killed Herald, like that would maybe then lead to the situation where Loki comes in, sees Shanks killing Herald, Shanks then leaves, and then Loki is like, oh, well, I'm gonna hunt down this man who just stabbed my dad to death, goes out to sea, chases after Shanks relentlessly until Shanks inevitably has to actually confront him, defeat him, chain him up, be like, by the way, don't worry, like, I didn't mean to kill your dad, but he turned into this crazy demon monster. That could explain how that entire exchange happened. That would be also very interesting. But then, to me, there's also the third and most dark horse candidate, Jarul. Nah, I'm just kidding. Jarul would never be strong enough to take down a demonized Herald. No, it's Scopper Gaban, my man. Despite having learned more about him, Scopper is still very much shrouded in mystery, I think, and has some very odd dynamics and relationships with certain characters. Like, why did he know where the Elbaf vault was, Loki's key, and just like mysteriously talk to Luffy, Nami, and Zoro, right? Like, clearly, Scopper knows way more than he's letting on still, especially when you consider this is a post-Laugh-Tale Scopper who knows the true history. If Scopper was the one who intervened, it just means that Scopper saw the large threat in Emu and was willing to act decisively here. We already know that he knows of the Holy Knights and of Emu, so I find it very likely that he was posting up on Elbaf, knowing the Giants were part of the big plan, which also might be why Scopper really doesn't have it out for Loki, since he knows what happens and kind of feels bad for the kid overall. Maybe Scopper, having learned so much and having been on God Valley, now realizes that Loki might be able to fill the shoes that Rox kind of expected Herald to fill, but actually do it the right way this time, and maybe is kind of, guiding Loki in the right direction where, Herald went the wrong direction. And this would kind of fit very well into the idea that I think that, Loki might have to be the big partner that Luffy needs, the Herald to Rox, Loki being that to Luffy, to actually take down Emu and change the world. But then again, maybe I just really want Loki to join the crew too hard, and this is just me trying to force that to happen. I don't know. But what if I instead pitched you the idea that Herald wasn't dead at all? How about that, right? Does that get you a little bit excited? Well, I think it should. Even though I myself am not fully sold on the idea, this is why I said I wanted to expand a little bit more on Loki earlier. Because in case you don't know my personal thoughts on Loki and why I really want him to join, I think he's been very specifically connected to the hellflame serpent that we've heard about in the Harley text and that we saw here in the mural, presumably, but that must be it. The reason being that on the mural, the giant who looks like Loki on the left here has the same textures and patterns as the Hellflame Serpent, and the Cursed Prince is rocking some sick Hellflamey snake eyes under those bandages, as we know. He alone is the honored one, but instead of hollow purples, I think he's got some Hellflame powers instead. Powers that may even be comparable to or literally be the same as Emu's Abyssal Dark Flames. So what if Loki literally told us what happened before to Herald before the flashback even started? Because I believe that Loki did not kill his father after all, but instead, during a moment of crazy emotional strife, awoke some crazy Hellflame powers and erased the Abyssal mark from Herald, burning him and turning his father into the man marked by flames. At least that's what the streets are saying, and I wanted to weigh in as well. Gonna, throw my own, what is it that you throw into the ring? Throw my towel into the ring? No, you know what I mean. Anyways, Loki has 2 lines before the flashback even started that have been bothering me for a while, but this could explain it. First off, in chapter 1143 here, Loki does literally say that Hashiruden doesn't believe that Loki killed Herald, and neither do I. I doubt that Loki would say this if he had actually done it, even if it was out of mercy, so clearly Loki's already told us that Herald didn't die by his hands, so what's to say that he died even, period? I mean, in this most recent chapter, Herald even tells us that he was planning to relinquish the throne anyways and have someone else rule over Elbaf instead. So it's not that far-fetched to think that he just dipped after this happened, especially after realizing what he almost led Elbaf into. He would not really feel like sticking around and kind of explaining this to everyone around him. And if Loki is tied to the Hellflame Serpent and was able to awaken some evil flame powers, burning off the Abyss mark from Herald, then we've got some fun things to work here with. And it could even explain why Loki literally tells Luffy and the gang that they'll need his power after they sense Emu's Haki in chapter 1151. He now knows that his power can override the immortality of the Holy Knights since he overrode his father's abyssal control as well, burning away that tattoo. Also, just Herald is low-key a very solid candidate for the man marked by flames in general. He's connected to ancient history through his bloodline and his relationship with Zebek, the Holy Land, and presumably even Shanks to some degree. He's from Elbaf, which is where Kid went to find the man marked by flames after Wano, right? Not to mention, he's also got a long-standing connection with the Fishmen, as we see in the recent chapter with Neptune, which adds even more intrigue here because they of course had a road poneglyph too. Actually, the missing road poneglyph is originally from Fishman Island, and so if Herald actually maintained ties with Neptune, it could explain why that one is the one missing, who was big enough to move it, and where it actually ended up on. Plus, it would also even sort of explain how Loki obtained the Mosa phone to talk to Shirahoshi, since we do know that Herald wanted the two of them to get engaged. Also, Herald might straight up sail along some fishmen, which might explain the whirlpools that the man marked by flames is supposed to create. Regardless though, even if Herald isn't that man, I'm not all that certain that Herald is dead in general, but I do think there's another character I need to talk about who's tied up into all of this. We already talked about him, Jarul. Now, what's Jarul's role in all of this? Honestly, at this point, who knows? It's very interesting that he's definitely there for this event, we just don't know in what capacity. If you watch the channel regularly, you probably know that I've been very suspicious of Jarul for a long time after we entered Elbaf. Even before we knew anything about Loki, he felt kind of suspicious, the entire sword sticking out of his head and stuff. So maybe he actually does turn out to be the bad guy here who framed Loki and maybe wanted some of that power for himself. Maybe he did like the direction, you know, that kind of Emu had for the warriors of Elbaf. I guess he wasn't too happy being from the old generation potentially of having Elbaf turn into a peaceful state, but the idea of having Elbaf be a war machine, a whole military, that might be very appealing to him, especially if he gets to, you know, lead that army. So maybe Jarul's whole plan was, okay, well, we're gonna keep that alliance with Emu up, but I'm gonna be the boss this time, and I'll just lead the giants, you know, as it was in my generation, as an army, as warriors. Or maybe he just wants to become immortal and get those crazy powers that he saw Herald get. Or maybe, as I mentioned earlier, maybe he mistook something. Maybe, you know, Loki was the one who struck down Herald, or he thought that Loki was the one who struck down Herald when actually something different happened, because maybe Loki arrived earlier and Jarul was just there, the wrong place at the wrong time. All I'm saying is don't be too surprised if we find out that Jarul actually has made a deal with the devil too. But now, let's properly shift into Herald's full arc here, because I haven't done a true deep dive into his character overall, because honestly, this flashback has been showing us so many bigger things that somehow Herald as a character felt more like a medium at points to reveal things rather than be an actual central character, because even, you know, technically God Valley was Herald's flashback. But with this chapter, I think it really clicked for me finally. I think I really understand now what Oda's been trying to do here and show us with him, and it's actually kind of insane if this is what's the case. So let me share my thoughts here. I think Herald is an incredibly messy character, in a good way from a writing perspective, but as a person, he's very messy. Like, you know, high school breakup messy. He sees Sebek as one of his best friends, his best friend in the world, but then threw him under the bus and then mourned his death. Yeah, man, like sick friendship skills you've got there. And then the dude went ahead and allied himself with Emu, becoming a full-on holy knight, only to then sacrifice himself later because somehow this man did not realize he was getting played, despite doing literal devil contracts and, you know, seeing all the evil stuff that's happening. Like, just look how he's treated in chapter 1167. Shanks makes him feel dumb, and the dude's apologizing for existing, I guess. And then, like, sure, the Gorosei and Garling are very much manipulating him, but this man never caught on? Or like, somehow you're telling me that this dude didn't realize the world government was doing anything bad? Or what's maybe even more dramatic, is Herald just in denial? Like, I really just cannot tell what was going through his head the entire time. Like, he had this vision of making Elbaf peaceful, but at what cost? To me, something has been feeling really off about him for a while now, and I could not place it for the love of me, but I think it might be because this flashback cuts a few corners and doesn't let the big feelings really sit in because everything has been moving so fast. So after now actually taking some time and rereading some of the chapters, I think I might have figured out why he is the way he is, and it was actually properly revealed in chapter 1168. And following the biggest trend of this flashback and the final saga, it is all about love. Harold's love for Ida specifically seems to be what's driving him more than anything else, and I just think it wasn't super duper clear, at least to me, maybe you feel differently, until this very chapter. And to be clear, it's not that I didn't realize that she was a driving force in his character or his beliefs. That was obvious, right? The whole beginning of this flashback is him realizing how bad the world views the giants and wanting to change that. I just feel like that was never enough for me, or like the main reason. Somehow he saw the world government's worst side and did not bat an eye at it, but it's now finally clear, I think, based on how he reacts to Ida's death, which was truly just heartbreaking in this chapter, man. Anyway, it's clear that all he wanted to do was live life with his family, right? He wanted Loki, Hasrudin, Ida, and him to explore the world as a great, big, happy, peaceful family. And I will say that love, man, love can do that to a guy. It makes you blind to the faults and things around you. And Oda, I gotta say, I didn't ever really expect you to showcase this part of a relationship in the series. And I'm here for it, right? I've had a full change of heart at this point because, yeah, I think it makes no sense that Harold would deny Zebek for so long, but it does suddenly make sense if it's because Ida was the only thing that truly mattered to Harold. Kind of how Edis and Blackbeard were the only two things that really mattered to Zebek in the end. Ida's dreams, that's what Harold has dedicated himself to 100%. I think it was never about Harold to begin with. Heck, I don't even know if it was really ever about Elbaf specifically. All Harold wanted was to fulfill his partner's real dream, and that hopeless dedication then of course cost him everything. That's what I think is the point of his character. He's a representation of the dangers of love and being blind to everything else because of it. I might be saying, Manu, duh, good job figuring this out at the end of this flashback, and if you already caught on to this, good job. I mean, for me, Harold just kind of, I don't know, I guess he was always like in the background, but I never had time to really think about it, so maybe this helped you like it helped me. And again, it really makes even more sense when you consider that the entire flashback has been putting love and complicated relationships, and especially love as a kind of incinerator or, catalyst for conflict. That's just been the whole concept of the God Valley flashback overall for Oda anyway, so it just makes sense that Harold, who technically this flashback is all about, would have that same message. In case you don't know what I mean, basically the entire thing that God Valley was basically caused by just one person, Shaki, who a lot of different people desired above everything else, whether it was, Roger, whether it was the Celestial Dragons, or in the end Rayleigh, and then Zebek, obviously his love to Edis was mostly driving him, and now we have Harold, who basically sacrificed everything, even his own morality and freedom, enslaving himself for the dreams of his wife Ida. I really am more and more convinced that the entire Void Century and maybe all the big conflicts in the One Piece world together were actually based on love. I mean, we already have the very weird triangle thing going on with Emu, Joy Boy, and Lily. Now we have Vivi. I really think that with the entire concept of Romance Dawn and whatnot, love is gonna play a much bigger role in One Piece than we all ever originally thought, but I think in a very cool way, where it's not like, oh, all the Straw Hats are getting boyfriends and girlfriends, even though that would be kind of cool too, right? But you know what I mean? Like, if that's not your thing, having relationships in the story, I think having love or failed love or dramatic love be like the main incinerator for all these crazy events and wars, that would be a very cool twist, I think. And I'm saying twist, but that's not even the right word because Oda has been very on the nose with it for quite a while now, I think. And honestly, I think that that's the coolest thing ever, dude, because I've been diving very deep into the Void Century recently, and I think that Herald himself is designed to show us the story of yet another character in the series. A character that we've been seeing way more of in the final saga, and someone who now has direct ties to Herald himself, Emu. Yeah, that guy. Yeah, I know it might sound a little bit weird, but I'm really starting to think that Herald's entire character arc and his character overall is like a small-scale representation and piece of foreshadowing of Emu's entire history. And what's super ironic and kind of cracks me up here is that I think that Elbaf as a whole is full of things that make it this sort of microcosm for the ancient history of the One Piece world. I find it hilarious personally only because of the scale of things. Like, Elbaf is so big, like literally gigantic, and I kind of find it really neat that Oda would use the giant arc and narratively make it a smaller representation of something else he's planning for in the story, which is double fitting since the arc starts you know, with Legos and a miniaturized version of a fake world of Elbaf. The entire Lego thing, you remember that? Yeah, anyways, I should kind of pivot back to Emu now since, you know, they're my biggest point and I can kind of feel like I'm losing you there. Emu is a weird, little, messed up, gassy smoke demon thing apparently, so how on earth do I think that Herald, that big, strong, passionate, very bold, shiny man, how could that man actually represent Emu? Well, once again, it's love, man. Like, love is the big through line here. I know I might sound like a broken record if you've ever watched a lot of my videos in the last few months, but Oda is making it so clear, I think. Love, romance, and dedication, these are all the true themes of the final saga. Romance Dawn, the original name of One Piece and the name of the first chapter, they aren't just about the romance and excitement of adventure, I think they're quite literal concepts at this point. At the dawn of this world, romance was the real architect. By that I mean that Emu's messed up little love life ruined the entire world, flooded the entire world. Major incel Emo over here fell in love way too hard and sent the world spiraling into chaos as a result. It would be kind of one of the creepiest love stories I've seen in a while if this turns out to be true. And while yes, Oda hasn't explicitly stated that Emo swooned over Lily, I think we can both agree that Oda has at least implied that the dude, you know, is pretty down bad for that lady. Like abyssal levels of deep, unyielding obsession, which, like, I kind of get it, man. Everyone's got their girl boss crushes, I guess. But like we see in chapter 1116, when Emu stares creepily and deeply at this portrait of Queen Lily, I don't know. And I'll tell you this, I don't have shrines to people I am not obsessed over in my house, so I've got a few shrines, and all of them are people I deeply am fawning over. Isn't that right? Anyways, no, I won't tell you who they are, you just have to guess. Kind of like with the tattoos. What a video filled with riddles, am I right? Now, Emu also tells the Gorosei that they desire Vivi now, which is just really unsettling and gross. Like, you don't use desire like that. It's weird, Emu. You're weird. You're a weird guy. What a weird guy. And Emu is even in denial about Lily's actions during the Void Century, saying that she, made a mistake by accident allowing the poneglyphs to be released, like, you know, it's like dropping some eggs or something, but not even saying it in a scolding, angry way. I kind of always got the vibe that it was like an, aw man, the girl I like made an irredeemable mistake, but I still love her, so gotta justify it somehow, kind of thing, right? It's clear to me at least that this isn't a political tension, not the vibe I'm getting. Let me know if you feel differently. It even seems like Emu tried to kidnap Vivi through CP0 at the Reverie. Like, the dude's pretty hung up on Vivi, and I've been wondering why, given that I think there is a pretty obvious answer. Nefertari, you see, was a real Egyptian queen and known as the most beautiful woman in the world. So, one, now you can see why in a bunch of other videos I'm trying to make it very clear that I think Nefertari Lily is of course tied to Amazon Lily, known for having the most beautiful women in the world, see Shaki. And two, more importantly, it's a total valid reason for Emu to obsess over Lily, and maybe he literally was trying to conquer the world for Lily. Like, maybe she was this top tier baddie during the Void Century, and maybe since they were both leaders of the 20 kingdoms that battled the Great Kingdom, Nerona Emu wanted to marry Lily and give her the world, but then he couldn't for some reason. Which would be exactly what we see through Herald, sort of at least, right? Like, obviously Big Herald wasn't trying to conquer the entire world, but he was hopelessly in love with Ida, doing everything for her dream. Trying to fulfill it at any cost of himself, his kingdom, his pride, his kingdom's pride, and even his safety, and that of everyone around him. And it even lines up with the love triangle stuff that happens when Estrid comes into the equation too. In chapter 1168, Harold literally keeps spouting off about Ida, wanting Ida, trying to be with Ida, but it's not allowed. And Emu may have just done the same thing. Nerona Emu may not have been that evil, shadowy beast we now see, but instead a man willing to, get this, become a slave to some demonic power like the Abyss, so that he could, you know, get what he wants. Or, you know, just get Lily, basically. The same thing that Harold does at the end of chapter 1166, but Emu clearly never secured the back. He never got that chance to connect with Lily because a pesky fellow named Joy Boy messed everything up, and as a result, Emu spiraled, becoming the monster that we know today. Which is of course the exact direction that Herald was heading in, especially after Ida's death. He became a Holy Knight and dang near caused Elbaf to become the entire personal army of Emu. All because he wanted to fulfill the love of his life's dream. So yeah, I do think that Herald's real story is meant to show us the darkest path that love can take you, prepping us later on for the reveal that this is a very similar dark path that Emu might have gone down as well. It'll explain why Oda makes Emu the big bad at the end of Elbaf and why the Holy Knights are the primary bad guys. They are the ones who deeply represent the twisted nature of love that Herald had too. And I mean, at this point, you know, it's pretty much on the nose with Summers and Scopper, two guys who have very different stances on love, in case you didn't notice, but also make their introductions properly on Elbaf. Elbaf's big secret apparently is that everyone there is down super bad, right? There must be something in the water. Maybe that's what the book was talking about. And boy, do I want to have some of what's in that water. And that continues in the story of Loki, who I'm so pumped is pretty much bound to end up with Shirahoshi at the end of the story, right? Just feels right. I really like it. But also, like, the poor chap does kind of deserve it, right? He's been proper screwed over by the concept of love in the series, and I do say he very might well deserve a proper lassie in his life. Like, my mate here wasn't around for the unfortunate passing of his two mothers, and his pops was always quite often sailing the seas for the world government. So I think this poor young lad does need a little bit of a break, doesn't he? Ooh. Sorry, the video's been long. I don't know what came over me here. But speaking of his father sailing the seas, I kind of wonder what route he actually took, right? Like, I think you could definitely map it out on this insanely detailed One Piece map that we made. Check it out. And maybe you can map out Loki's path on it for me. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. I think with the British accent, it's now time to quit this video. Shout out to our Patreons. You guys rock. And I will see you on Thursday for some Brook Holy Knight action. Things are getting spicy.